In this guide, we're going to explain the 3 most common decisions that a beginner will need to make during a multiplayer game, how we can use scouting to gather the information that we need, and finally, when we should be clearing creep camps if we aren't able to make these ideal decisions. Because of the fog of war blocking what we can see beyond our immediate vision, we don't necessarily know what our opponent is doing at all times. This is why decision making in RTS games is so challenging, because we're always trying to make decisions without necessarily having all the information available to us. The act of gathering this information is referred to in RTS communities as scouting, and it is what information you are able to gather that will determine what decisions you are able to make. What we choose to scout can get very complex the better you become as a player, but at the most basic level, the simplest way to determine whether you should be attacking, defending, or expanding against an opponent is by monitoring how many bases your opponent has compared to you. As a general principle, if your opponent has 1 or more bases than you, your bias should be to attack them. If you have 1 or more bases than your opponent, your bias should be to defend them. And if both you and your opponent have the same number of bases and no one has a clear advantage, your focus should be to take your next expansion to grow your lead over them. Bases, and by extension the amount of workers gathering at those bases, is by far the single easiest way to determine who is winning a game of Stormgate, as a player with more bases will be able to gather more resources, thus be able to build more units per minute, ultimately having a larger army as a result. If in your games your opponent has 1 more base than you must either kill that base to stay equal in economy, or take your own base to catch up as quickly as possible. If you are ahead on bases and leading in economy, attacking an opponent is one of the easiest ways to throw away a game that you are winning, as all you need to do to win is maintain those bases, defend them from attacks, and the longer you have a greater economy than your opponents, the more units you will have in your army compared to them. Likewise, if no player has a clear lead in bases, your focus should be to establish a new base and defend it, as attacking your opponent on their side of the map with defender's advantage is unlikely to go well, as you should have the same number of units due to your identical economies. If, for whatever reason, you don't feel safe enough to take a new expansion, when on an equal amount of bases, you can alternatively choose to invest in a new piece of technology to help improve your long-term position in the game, by unlocking a new unit, upgrade, or tier. Although this is safer, as you can stay within the confines of your existing base to defend, teching is not as beneficial for your long-term growth compared to expanding, and if you choose to tech up and your opponent chose to expand, they would likely end up in a better position than you later down the line. To give a loose estimation of how often you should be scouting an opponent's bases during a game of Stormgate, the majority of players will choose to scout their opponent at the very start of the game, as many players may even choose to expand in the very first minutes of the game. After that, if you're able to scout your opponent every 2 minutes, that would give you plenty of information as to what they're currently up to make effective decisions based off whether they expanded or not. Although any unit could be used to scout, there are some options that are particularly good to use for each faction. For the Vanguard, the best unit to use is your aptly named Scout unit, which spawns with you at the start of the game. But once you get to tier 2, the next best way to scout for a beginner is to use the sensor drone ability in the global ability bar, that can shoot itself to a fixed location of your choosing and stay there until it's either shot down or expires. For Infernals, the best unit to use to gather information at all stages of the game is the Hexen, or more specifically, using the Skull of Shedder ability, which spawns a low health but fast moving air unit that can fly around an enemy base gathering all the information you need. For Celestials, they are the only faction that does not start with a unit in multiplayer games to scout their opponents. However, they do start with a global ability already unlocked called Zenith Scan, which illuminates any part of the map over a large radius for 2 seconds, which is enough to scout almost an entire base on its own. This scan then reduces to a much smaller area for 8 seconds, and can be recasted every 60 seconds. Later into the game, the Celestials also unlock a unit called the Scanner, which is unlocked by upgrading your Arc ship to tier 2. Scanners are essentially the Celestials' version of the Scouts, which are great for probing all around an enemy base, as they can not only fly, but they also have an ability where they can attach themselves to a tree and cloak, all while being the exact same price to construct as a normal Scout. If you find it difficult to remember to consistently scout, many players will use a combination of active scouting and passive scouting. Passive scouting is where we leave units in certain key areas on the map, in the same way players use wards in MOBAs like League of Legends. For example, if we want to know when our opponent takes their next expansion, all we need to do is leave a unit next to the expansion that is closest to them, as this is the most likely base they will take next. As long as this unit stays alive, by just glancing at our minimap, we will be able to see whether our opponent has yet to take their expansion or have just started constructing it, all without having to spend additional multitasking to gather that information. The easiest options to use as a passive scout are sensor drones, venom traps from the Hexen, and scanners attached and cloaked to trees. The reason for this is that both sensor drones and venom traps do not count as units. This means when using Control Group 1 or the All Army hotkey to select and give orders to your units, you won't accidentally pull off all the passive scouts you've placed around the map. This is also true for scanners, which although they do count as a unit, once it's locked onto a tree, it won't move when selected, unless you once again press its ability to remove it from the tree. If you want to remove a unit from all your control groups to use it as an active or passive scout, the easiest way is to select the unit, then hold down the Alt key on your keyboard, then select a new number to bind the unit to. Using the Alt key specifically will remove that unit from all previous control groups, so it won't be selected when trying to select and control your main army. But it will still be selected when pressing spacebar, so it's best to avoid the All Army hotkey and instead try and use the 1 key to select and control your army. In addition to these 3 decisions you can make, in Stormgate there's actually a 4th option which is called creeping. From a basic decision-making perspective, killing creeps is the perfect in-between option to go for if you either aren't convinced you are going to be able to attack your opponent successfully, or you aren't certain they are planning to attack you. Killing creep camps will likely not gain you a huge lead in a game. However, attacking creeps carries with it significantly lower risk than attacking your opponents, and can be a good option to go for if you don't know whether you should be attacking or defending. For example, if you were going to attack your opponent who is ahead in expansions, and you decide for whatever reason that your attack is not going to be successful, perhaps because you waited too long to attack their new base, and now they have lots of static defense constructed. Instead of trying to attack such a heavily defended position, you could instead use your army to clear out all your opponent's creeps on their side of the map, to deny your opponent from being able to clear them themselves, all while expanding back at home to catch up in economy. Likewise, if you should be defending because you are ahead on bases, but the enemy hasn't tried to attack you and you don't know if they ever will, instead of waiting for this to happen, you could do something useful with your units and clear some quick camps in the immediate vicinity of your base, while still being close enough to home to go back and defend if need be. Ultimately, creep camps are an excellent way to get more value out of your units in between direct engagements with your opponent, and will help you to remain equal in a game even if you aren't able to make ideal decisions. In my last video, we took a look at how the multi-build mechanic works for the Vanguard faction, demonstrating the diminishing returns you will face when adding each new worker onto a structure, and explored whether rushing out your command post is worth the loss of mining you will face when using more than just one worker, which you can check out by clicking the box on screen or clicking the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to like and subscribe if you want to help a really small channel like mine, and I'll see you in the next one.